Hello everyone, excuse the recording through the phone, but unfortunately I left the SD card for my camera behind at the house and I can't be bothered to go back. So this video is going to be glorious Samsung phone quality, I'm afraid. Anyway, my task for today is to do a full service on Max. I know I've already done a video about this a few years ago, but that was actually just a basic service. This time I'm going to do the whole lot. I'm going to do oil filter, gearbox oil, diff oil, fuel filter, air filter, change the spark plugs, and also change the coolant. So it's Saturday today. It is actually already midday, but I've just taken the car for a drive to get everything warmed up. So first job is going to be to drop the oil, and then I'll tackle the gearbox oil. So we'll see how far we get and carry on tomorrow. Right, so you'll have to excuse the bizarre filming angle, but it is quite cramped under here. But if you look up here, this is the transmission, that's the engine up front. And as you can see up here, we have this filler hole. Okay, there we go, that's the filler hole. And this is the drain hole. So what we want to do is when we are draining the transmission, the first thing you want to do is open the filler hole. Then you can drain the transmission. And the reason being that if you can't get this filler hole open and you've already drained your transmission, then you're in big trouble. Whereas if you've already opened the filler hole, then you can refill your transmission without any trouble. All right, there we go. That's the hole. We've got the filler plug out. Now we can go ahead and drain the transmission. Right, there you can see a better shot of the draining plug for the transmission. So that's what I'm going to open up now. Right, drain plug is successfully removed. Most of the oil is now drained out already. Okay, so we have one more horrible fiddly job to do, and that is to remove the oil filter. Right, the filter is out. I didn't film the process because it's actually very difficult to see. Basically the filter is down here on the side of the engine. Very awkward place to access. The best way to do it is from under the car. And actually the best thing to do is to take the wheel off, but I forgot to do that. And because the car is now up on axle stands, it's pretty much impossible. Right, so here's our new oil filter. It's a genuine Mazda one. I always get a genuine one because it only costs a couple of quid more. And what I normally do is I just top up a little bit of oil in here. It's not strictly necessary to do that, but it just basically will reduce the amount of time that the engine is running with no full lubrication going on while this fills up. There's no point in making it too full because you're going to have to kind of put it on its side to get it back into the engine again. Okay, new filter's in. I've tried to clean up a little bit as well. It's difficult to get to, but I've cleaned off most of it. But honestly, any oil that's left over is not really going to do any damage. Okay, so there is actually one more kind of fiddly job to do, and that is to replace the transmission oil. There's not really very much access, and you basically have to just keep filling it until oil dribbles out of the side, which is kind of hilariously simple, but that's the way it's done. I did buy myself this, which should hopefully make the job a little bit easier. And this is a little hand pump. So basically you can just put that into the filler hole and then you can just basically pump this and the oil will hopefully go straight into the transmission. So the gear oil we'll be using is this Redline MT90, which is an SAE 75W90 gear oil, which is what is specified for the MX5. It is fully synthetic, comes pretty well recommended, so I'm going to give it a go. Right, so transmission drain plug is back on again, and we now need to start filling the transmission through the filler hole. So we have our pump full of new oil, and the little nozzle is in the filler hole, and basically now what we have to do is just pump it until the oil comes out of the filler hole. Right, we've emptied one full bottle so far, and all I can say is this is not a job that I want to repeat again in a hurry. Alright, we've done it. We have oil dripping out. So I think we have finally completed this hideous job. Okay, so the procedure for the diff is pretty much the same as the gearbox. First we're going to loosen the filler plug, then we're going to loosen the drain plug. Right, got the two plugs out and all of the diff oil is now draining into this. I've got this extra little jack here because the car is actually very slightly on an angle backwards, and I want to make sure that we get the car level before we refill this. Right, so I've just pumped some more oil into there, and it's just started dripping out again, so we know that that's full. So now we can close that up, and that is the horrible job of diff and gearbox oil done. Well, I have to say this thing has been a lifesaver. I definitely would not have been able to do this job without this little pump. So if anybody wants to know what it is, it's a Sealy 1 litre multi-purpose mini pump. Okay, so gearbox oil is done, diff oil is done, so the last oily task that we need to perform is to refill the engine. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so the MX5 takes about 3.6 litres. Basically what I normally do is fill it up to about 3 litres, and then I start checking the dipstick to make sure that we don't overfill it. So this is 0W40 fully synthetic. I have another video on my channel where I explain why I use this particular oil. It's one of my most controversial videos. I get a lot of comments on that video, people telling me I'm wrong and I don't know what I'm talking about, blah blah blah. As I mentioned in that video, oil is a very contentious subject, and everybody tends to have their own opinions about what is right and what is wrong. However, I did my research in many different places before making that video, and that was the result. Anyway, I've made my decision to use this oil, and I believe that it works very well in this engine. So the point of all my waffling is basically make sure that you do your research before you do anything, and don't believe everything you see on the internet. That looks pretty good to me. I'd say that is pretty much there, but what we need to do next is start the engine, get the oil fully circulated, and then give it a few minutes to settle again. Okay, I would say that needs a little bit more. Okay, let's just give that a little bit of time to soak down into the engine, and then we shall do one last check. So, while we're just waiting for the engine oil to drain down again, we can deal with the air filter, which is the next job. Now, the last time that I changed the air filter, I actually put in a K&N reusable filter. And what you can do with those is you can actually clean them, and that allows you to reuse the same filter for quite a long time, actually, if you care for it well. But what I realized was that it was quite inconvenient for me to get the filter out, do all the cleaning, and put it all back while doing all the other servicing items. So what I decided to do instead was buy a second one, which was a bit of an investment because they're not cheap. But my idea being that I can put the second one in and be driving the car in the meantime, and then clean the first one at my leisure and keep it for the next time I do a service. So here is the new one, and they're not cheap, so this was quite a pricey service all in all. But hopefully I won't have to buy another one for quite a long time now. Oh shit. Definitely works, because if you look at this side, it looks like new still, and there is a bit of grey dirt on this side. But this filter has plenty of life left in it still, so I'm going to reuse that. So the big question is it worth getting a K&N filter over a stock factory one? In my opinion, yes, definitely. They claim that it adds horsepower, but I am very dubious about that claim. However, what it does do is allows a lot more of the induction noise to come through this whole air system. So you get a very pleasing growl from the engine when you are accelerating. So just for that alone, it is worth it in my opinion. Right, next up, spark plugs. So these haven't been changed in a while. I think 2016 was the last time I did these. where's my ratchet? I wonder how much time car people spend looking for their tools. Must be quite considerable. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they have fared. So there's our new one on the right and our old one on the left. The terminal has worn down a little bit, so that will make a bit of a difference to how well it sparks. But yeah, they do look pretty healthy. Well, this one does anyway. We'll check the other cylinders as well. Now these spark plugs are a slightly different type of spark plug. They have a slightly different design, which is designed to get the spark closer to the cylinder head for better combustion. I have no idea whether this will really make any difference. Probably not. But it clearly is something that someone has taken the time to design. So I thought I'd give it a go. So one thing which is supposedly a good idea is when you install new spark plugs, just wet the threads a little bit with some oil, and that will reduce the likelihood of them seizing in the block. I've never had a problem getting spark plugs out of this car, so I'm not sure whether that's really necessary, but it's something that I was taught and I've just got into the habit of doing it. Right, spark plugs are done, air filter's done, oil is done. Pretty much all of the main service items are done now. The only thing left to do is coolant and fuel filter, which I'm going to do tomorrow. Right, so let's start her up again and see how she runs. So actually the idle sounds a bit better now with the new spark plugs. It was a little bit on the lumpy side before. New oil always sounds good in an engine, sounds nice and quiet. The loudest sound you can hear is actually the injectors. Right, so we're going to leave it there for the day and I shall continue tomorrow. Okay, so it's day 2 and you'll have to excuse my rather sweaty appearance. It's kind of hot in here. So I think the first thing I'm going to tackle is the fuel filter. Okay, so the first thing to do whenever you're working on something to do with fuel is to disconnect the battery terminals. This will stop any stray sparks from igniting your fuel and burning your face off. Right, so we're under the back of the car and the fuel filter is located under this little cover here. So the fuel cover is secured by these little weird fastener things. They look like ordinary screws, but they're kind of like a weird combination of a screw and a pop fastener. So what you can do is you can just unscrew this middle bit, and then with a bit of cajoling you can pop this out. Right, so here's our fuel filter. It's secured on by these 2 bolts at the top here, and what we're going to have to do is remove the fuel lines, and then basically we can remove this filter. I think what I'm going to do is loosen up these bolts first before I start touching the fuel. What I don't want to do is end up with a problem where I've got fuel gushing out and I can't stop up the holes. I did bring along some plastic chopsticks, which I think should plug the hole quite well, but if in case it doesn't and it all goes wrong, I want to have the fuel lines disconnected for the shortest amount of possible time. Now, because the MX5 is a fuel injected car, this means that the entire fuel system is under pressure. So before doing any work on the fuel lines, we have to release the pressure that will be in the system. So the way that we do that is to disconnect the fuel relay, which is behind this panel below the driver's side dashboard. Right, so it should be this relay here with the yellow bottom. So the manual says we should start the car and then pull the relay out, and then if it is the right relay, the car will stall. Let's see what happens when I turn the key. It is definitely out of gear. I mean, the wheels are off the ground anyway, so it's not like anything's going to happen. Wait, I disconnected the battery, didn't I? Of course I fucking did. Okay, take 2. Right, annoyingly the camera stopped recording halfway through that, but basically it worked. The car basically stalled once I unplugged this. So this now means that the fuel line is depressurized. So I'll now disconnect the battery again and we can have another go at the fuel filter. Alright, so I have now removed both of the bolts. And this is the bit that I'm not looking forward to. I've now got to basically take off these clips and try and plug the holes Right, so I have no idea how I didn't notice it before, but this new filter doesn't actually come with the mounting bracket. So actually what I'm going to have to do is disconnect this old filter from the mounting bracket and then put the new filter on. Okay, so the new filter is in place. The chopsticks were completely ineffectual, as I unfortunately suspected would be the case. So I had to very quickly try and push the pipe onto the new filter, try not to lose as much fuel as I can. I did make a bit of a mess, but actually the unexpected problem was in fact this underseal, because when it comes into contact with petrol, it basically just dissolves into this disgusting, oily, tacky stuff. It just gets all over your hands and all over your tools. It's just rather disgusting. You can actually see a bit of it on this pipe here, because actually normally speaking, this stuff is almost hard to the touch. It's a little bit tacky, but like it's pretty much solid. Right, everything is all in place. Everything has been tightened up. I've tried to clean up some of the goopy mess that got everywhere. Quite difficult to do, really, but I think this is okay. I also don't want to rub off too much of the underseal, because actually this underseal is pretty awesome. Right, so I think before I go and put that plastic cover back over the fuel filter, I think I just need to test and make sure that everything is working. Good. Right, everything is now back in place, so this is job done. Okay, so now we can turn our attention to replacing the coolant. So the first thing I've done is I've removed the under tray. It's not strictly necessary to do this because there is actually an access hole in the middle of the under tray, which is here. And that actually allows you to access the drain plug for the radiator. But in my case, I wanted to have a look anyway, see what things look like under there. There is a bit of grime, bit of oiliness, and that I have ascertained comes from the air conditioning compressor, which as I've mentioned in a previous video is not in a good way at all. So I actually don't use the air conditioning anymore. Lots of people would say I should just fucking get rid of it, but quite honestly it does have its uses. There are times when it's quite nice to be driving with the roof up, like on the motorway for example, and not have a really stuffy hot cabin. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get hold of, in fact it's impossible to get hold of new replacement compressors. You can find second-hand ones, but you're basically just taking a gamble because they're all at least around 25 years old, so yeah, it doesn't really bode well. Ideally, I'd like to find someone who kind of does air conditioning for classic cars and just basically take it in there and get them to do it. Right, so draining the coolant is pretty simple. First we just need to open the radiator cap. And then basically we just open the drain plug and all of the water will then drain out of the system. Right, there's all our old coolant. It's a little bit on the brown side. I think it's definitely seen better days. So now what you basically need to do is kind of flush the system through a little bit. Unfortunately, I don't have a hose here, but I'm going to just flush through with a little bit of water, and then that should be enough for now, I think. And the next time I do this job, hopefully I'll be somewhere where there is a hose. Right, so flushed it through a bit, collected a bit more of the residue. So I'm going to fill with new coolant now. I have pre-mixed some coolant here. The real ratio is actually 35 to 65, but I've kind of just eyeballed it basically with like 1/3 and 2/3. Very important, of course, is not to forget to put your drain plug back in before you start refilling things. Ask me how I know. Right, so basically we now just fill this until the radiator is full, and then we'll start the car and circulate the coolant a bit, and then top it up as required. The radiator is 6 litres, and this is a 5 litre container, so we're going to need a little bit more. Right, the radiator is now full, and what we're going to do now is we're going to just run the car, and that will basically get it up to temperature, and then this thermostat will open and the coolant will circulate. But before we do that, I'm going to need to mix a little bit more of this coolant. So people get very confused about what coolant to use. So for the MX5, you can use pretty much any coolant really. It's not specifically fussy. However, you should always use the same coolant. So you shouldn't put two different types of antifreeze into your system at the same time. This stuff is ethylene glycol, and there is another type as well, which I forget now. But I've always used this one, and it's been pretty decent. Right, so now we're just going to start the engine and we're going to run it until it gets warm, and that will start to circulate the coolant. The other thing I'm going to do is turn the heater on, because that will get the coolant also circulating through the heater matrix. Right, that's looking good. We've got some steam coming out there, and when I rev the engine you can see it moving. Still haven't needed to top it up though. Okay, well I still haven't needed to top it up, but we've got definite flow going through there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to top it up to the top, and then I'm going to fill the overflow tank as well so that it can take more from there if it needs to. Right, so the fan's just come on, so it's definitely up to temperature. I've filled the tank up to the full line, and we've closed up the system, so now I can pressurize. So yeah, that should be all good then. Right, so that is our full service done. We've done the engine oil, transmission oil, diff oil, oil filter, air filter, fuel filter, and we've changed the coolant and the spark plugs. So that pretty much is everything that needs to be done on a full service. I do have one other job to do, which is to change the gear lever gaiter, because that's perished. But I will save that for another video, which I'll release as and when I do the job. So for now, thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.